Thank you, Father Cameron. Father Cameron's already said thank you for everyone coming, but on behalf of the family, I would like to say that again, please. Especially for all of you who travelled from near and far. Mum would be pretty chuffed to know you were sitting here, celebrating her life. Thank you. Earl Minnie Wright was born in Sydney's Women's Hospital in Paddington on the 26th of March 1920. So today would have been her 93rd birthday. How about that? Okay. She was the first child of Eric Cowley Wright and Minnie Wright, near Harris, and is survived by her sister Joy, 12 years younger. At Joy's birth, Mum was disappointed that she received a baby sister because what she really wanted was a puppy. She's told us that story quite recently. Although named Pearl, she was always known as Bunty. I'll just explain why. As a child, she had a charming habit of wrinkling up her nose when she smiled, and because of that, she was affectionately known as Bunny. But Bunny became Bunty, and it remained so throughout her whole life. She was the mother of 6 children, born in the far north tropical places of Cairns and Thursday Island, with my twin brother, David, dying the day after birth on TI. And Christopher, killed tragically in a car accident at Rolleston in 1971, leaving us 4.
Keep going.
Just wondered whether they bolted. She was a loving and proud mother, grandmother and great-grandmother to her family. Mum grew up in the hard years, in the depression years. While working with Ku-ring-gai Municipal Council, Mum became engaged to John Warby, our dad. The couple were married at Dad's parents' home in Gordon, Sydney, in May 1942. While Dad was on leave from the army before being sent to New Guinea. They were not to see each other again for 3 years following their wedding. Mum enlisted in the Signal Training Battalion of the Australian Women's Army Service in August 1942. She was made a Lance Corporal on her 2nd day in camp, rising to Corporal, then Sergeant, and later being commissioned as an officer with the rank of Lieutenant. Mum was posted to the Atherton Tableland where she sent and received messages from New Guinea. Discharged in 1945, thankful to be together again, and both enjoying the great outdoors, Mum and Dad travelled to Townsville, where they bought a crayfish boat, decommissioned from the army. Dad sailed it to Cairns, where they worked fishing for trocus shell. He engaged a crew of Torres Strait Islanders and Aboriginal divers and went to Thursday Island, where they then fished for pearl shell. Like that. They were usually at sea for 2 to 3 weeks, so it was a pretty hard life still. Thursday Island was a very exciting place to be in those days. It was a happy time after the stresses and strains of World War II. Mum cultivated many lifelong friends in her time there. Friendships with artists, poets and writers. Mum often remembers her days on Thursday Island as some of the happiest of her life. Mum and Dad had already started a family when Peter Benny, the Archdeacon on Thursday Island, asked Dad to take over as the superintendent of the run-down and isolated Lockhart River Mission on Cape York Peninsula. They did that for the next 9 years. It was a new and challenging community of around 300 Aborigines and Torres Strait Islanders. There were no facilities, and Mum and Dad worked hard to improve the conditions and increase the food quality and the rations of those on the mission. It's hard to imagine bringing in supplies only every 3 months or so, and that was if you were lucky. Mum told the story of baking bread, which she did daily. But sometimes she's used flour that had weevils in it. Instead of wasting it, she would just say, "It's all good protein." Sometimes the hops for the yeast were brewed in bottles that regularly exploded, which meant there would be no bread for the mission staff that day. Now, with the family of 5 and a 4th child, Carolyn, due to be enrolled in St Mary's School in Herberton, Mum was determined that this would not happen.
Thank you, Mum.
She already had 3 children at boarding school, and which she only saw once a year. So this was not going to happen. It coincided with Dad's strong calling to enter the church. Consequently, with mixed feelings, they moved to Rockhampton in 1960. After arriving in the Rockhampton area, Mum became matron and housekeeper at St Faith's School in Yeppoon, where the 3 girls attended. Chris and I, my brother Chris and I, remained at boarding school in Ravenshoe. Some years later, Mum operated the seaside shop at Keppel Sands for 10 years, expanding it to include a post office and a switchboard. Personally, I've got a lot of thank yous for my mum. Some might seem to you to be quite trivial and insignificant. Others are more important. They're all important. Here's some of the thank yous that I want to pass on for my mum. Firstly, thanks for being my mum, for the sacrifices you made on our behalf. Thank you also for suffering through my weekly boring letters that I was forced to write from school. For 5 years. She kept them all. They usually went something like this. Dear Mum and Dad, I am well and happy. I hope you are well and happy too. The weather is trees. I played cricket today. Love, John. I don't know how she looked forward to receiving these each week, but she kept them all. Thank you, Mum, for allowing us the freedom, total freedom with us kids when we were at Lockhart. After the strains and stresses and the regimentation of boarding school, the freedom of Lockhart was just wonderful. Thank you for typing up my play, Mum, which I wrote when I was 8. No, you won't want to know what it was. Even if the play took 3 months to come back from Lockhart, I'd handwritten it, Mum typed it for me, sent it back. And then I was caned for putting the play on with schoolmates after school because I hadn't asked permission from the brothers. Them's the breaks. Thank you, Mum, for the homemade ice cream that you made for us kids all the time. Sorry if we ate it all in one sitting. Because Mum used to get a bit annoyed. It'd take her a while to make it. And she'd say, if you eat it all now, you realise there's no more until next week. Yes, Mum. Thank you for being there for me every afternoon when school finished. Again, after 5 years of boarding school, I loved sharing those afternoons with you and talking about the day. I'd bound up the stairs. Mum, did you make any biscuits today? We'll see. And then there'd be other comments like, don't lick the bowl. No, I've told you no. That's it. Go on, off you go. But secretly, I think she really enjoyed those times with us as well. Thank you for sharing the love of sport with me. I love discussing the cricket team changes with you, even when Ponting was sacked. Whether he should be retained or left out, I don't know. Also, checking with you who you thought would win the football games this weekend, because Mum loved the Broncos. I know I didn't have any say in it, but I happen to have the best mum ever. I would not have swapped you for quid. Thank you, Mum. I love you.
Mum became interested in the propagation of rare and endangered plants, became a registered native plant grower and a member of the Society for Growing Native Plants. Mum and I experimented, propagating many plants from cuttings: Grevillea, Callistemon, Melaleuca, Geraldton wax, Banksias, and so much more. Over the time, we became very successful, and we were chuffed. Thus, the idea of the green toad growers was born over a barbecue at Keppel Sands with a glasser, as you do. It was impossible to drive anywhere with Mum without her shouting, "Stop!" jumping out with the secateurs and taking cuttings or seeds. The car was always equipped with brown paper, plastic bags, and a black marker pen. No local creek bed was safe if there was clean sand to be seen. Yes, bucket and spade in tow, off we would go, bring it home and sterilise the sand with copious amounts of boiling water. Mum knew the botanical name of almost every Australian plant. She pronounced them beautifully. Propagating became a very relaxing, enjoyable and happy time for Mum. We fondly called ourselves Big Toadie and Little Toadie. As a tribute to her work 5 years ago, Rockhampton City Council placed a bench in Kershaw Gardens near the waterfall, which it called Bunty's Bench. Future generations can visit and reflect on this remarkable woman called Bunty. The family invites you all to take time to sit and enjoy the peacefulness around that special corner. Mum, thank you for being a lovely nana to our grandchildren who adore you. And to my grandchildren, Maddie, Callum and Lily, who love you so very much. We have had many times of wonderful, happy family chaos. When children visited, Nicole would phone up and say, "Brace yourself, Nana, I'm on the way over." Always remembering our haven holidays together, often with Nicole's family as well. I will never forget the image of Mum on her walker, surrounded by Maddie and Callum, their hands on her back, guiding her to her room for a rest, with Lily in the background saying, "Me too, me too." Mum would smile gently and say, "Oh, they're so sweet." Mum, thank you for being my mother, my mentor. My friend, guiding me through the hard times and laughing with me through the good. You have been my rock throughout my life, and for that I say thank you 100-fold. Mum, over the years in the circle of life, the tide turned and the roles reversed, and I became your rock and your carer. You'll always be with me in my heart. Cheers to wonderful memories. Ching ching. Rest in peace, my darling.
Well done, Cecilia.
Mum was a strong feminist. She was always saying, "Go the girls." She was a feisty intellectual and she didn't suffer fools. She could be warm and loving and equally distracted as thoughts occupied her mind. She was an enigma at times. Complex, simple, stoic, easy to get along with, difficult and scratchy at other times. She sometimes perplexed us all, and yet she loved us all with our many faults unconditionally. She always had an open mind to new ideas and was accepting of everyone. She was a staunch protector of the gay community. In her own words, "To each their own, we're all individuals." She studied the great religions of the world and described herself as a strong agnostic. When I asked her why she married a priest, she said, "I didn't. I married a soldier." Mum was a reader but never wrote, a classical music and opera buff but never sang. She loved her art but never painted, but was able to travel twice with me to Sydney to see the Archibalds and was a supporter of family artist friends. In later years she enjoyed many travels with Dad and my family to Uluru and the Olgas, sailing the Whitsundays on a catamaran, joining John and his family there. We took her back to her beloved Hawkesbury River, revisiting the Joyous Guard home where she and Dad had many happy memories at Flint and Steel. They had their honeymoon there. And she also travelled with June and I to Cairns, the Barossa, the Great Ocean Road and Melbourne. She was our road trip buddy. Mum and Karen also travelled to Sydney to enjoy oysters and Chardonnay and made many happy memories. Her one ambition was to see China, but she was happy just to visit New Zealand for a couple of days and see the geezers and the mud pools and the Maoris. She was very proud of that passport. Mum loved her daily crossword and the many colourful birds and parrots that visited daily. Mum had a wonderfully mischievous sense of humour and regularly burst into laughter as some small disaster unfolded. She loved to quote from poetry and literature, one of her favourites being Archie the Cockroach and Mehitabel the Cat, saying, "Toujours gay, always a lady, Archie." She embraced her computer and proudly wore the title Our Geek Girl. She loved playing solitaire and she was able to Skype her family and at 92 rip CDs to the hard drive and send and receive emails. She loved to fish, a love grown from her father Eric taking her out on the rowboat to the various bays that Sydney Harbour offered, and it's family legend the number of times that I would have to walk around the bluff of Keppel Sands to Pumpkin Creek to bring home the creel of overspilling whiting and bream. You cannot catch a fish now at Keppel Sands. I think she caught them all. Cold fish was always her favourite. She always made sure she cooked a little bit more for the next day. Auntie Warby was not a frivolous woman. She had no need for painted nails, expensive moisturiser or designer clothes. She was a child of the Depression and made sure that every cent counted and that every dollar earned its keep. Later at the shop that she and Dad bought in 1970, she became a real estate sub-agent and once attended an auction down near Pumpkin Creek in an attempt to boost the price of the house. When bidding stalled, she unintentionally bought that house. I think that's illegal these days, Mum. It was always to her great dismay that she was unable to attend university. She always wanted to be a Professor of English. For the past 4 years, she's been lovingly cared for by Carolyn, and we know how much she appreciated and respected Carolyn's devoted care and attention. We all did. Under Carolyn's loving care, she never once had a cold. So thank you. And thank you, onions. I already miss phoning Mum every afternoon at 5 o'clock to catch up on the day's news over a glasser. It was our special time. Thank you, Mum, for everything that you've shown me, for everything that you've shared with me, for everything that you've taught me. You are always teaching me gently still. Last year, on one of my visits home, Mum welcomed me at the front door, as she always did, with the words, "Hello, dear old girl." We tightly hugged. It was good to be home. I protested, "Oh, Mum, surely you're the dear old girl." She replied, "No, you are, darling." And I said, "Well, what does that make you then?" And she replied, "I am the matriarch." What can you say? And so ends an era. The past 8 weeks have very much epitomised Mum's extraordinary character traits that have carried her through the hardships and challenges of her interesting life. A couple of weeks prior to Mum's passing, I told her that I had fallen in love with her all over again, and how much I admired her quiet dignity, her inner strength and steady resolve, all with glimmers of humour and poetic quotes. These qualities shone through as she faced new challenges, one day at a time. It was inspirational. She turned to me and smiled a deep, long smile that reached into my soul. Her blue eyes sparkled and she said softly, "Thank you, Junie." Most of my life has been saying goodbye, Mum. We would talk each Sunday on the phone, laughing and chattering as her grandchildren joined the Warby mob over the years. And also those weekly letters from boarding school. Oh yes. For 6 years as a young girl, our relationship and pleasure in sharing family news and interests kept us emotionally and mentally bonded. So I looked forward to coming home to sharing our love of classical music and opera and puzzling over the crossword. Actually, Mum was better at it than I was. Mum's last word, spoken to me, was, "Hello." How good was that? We will miss you so much, my darling.